What's the most morally questionable thing you've done? I made my verbally abusive boss legally change his name. He would always say I was horrible at my job, replaceable, and all that standard stuff. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, so I sent him a text saying, "Sorry, John, but I'm done with your shit and I'm quitting." After quitting, I decided that since the company did nothing to punish him, I would. I set him up to receive numerous calls and emails from more than 200 insurance companies and religious establishments. He was a massive atheist. The best was when I signed him up for the Mormon Church, who, according to my co-workers, actually made several visits to his house and even office, as our company is in Salt Lake City. I also put several personal ads on Craigslist in his name, requesting that people call and degrade him because he has a degradation kink and cannot perform unless he's being called a naughty boy and when his weight is being made fun of. After 2 months of endless spam, he snapped one day and changed his name, phone number, and email, which is when I finally cut it out. Morally, it's questionable, but I definitely had a lot of fun doing it. Story 2.
Hold up. If you're enjoying this video so far, please don't forget to subscribe. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
What's the best payback your school's quiet kid got on a bully? Mikey was the smartest kid in school. His parents both worked at NASA, and he's currently a professor at Harvard. He was brutally bullied back when it was normalized. The ringleader was a classic 80s bully who was preppy and drove his beloved shiny red BMW 2002, which his parents lovingly restored. One day, Mikey took a dead rat from the biology room and put it in a large glass jar with some hydrogen peroxide and water. He sealed the jar, got into the dude's car during football practice, and tucked it under the seat. It was blazing hot in California, and it didn't take long for the chemicals to liquefy and putrefy the rat and build pressure until the jar exploded with great effect in the school parking lot. You could smell the damage from hundreds of yards away, and the dean smelled it from the office about 300 yards away and called the cops. The bully's family professionally detailed and steamed the car multiple times before the cleaners admitted the car was totaled. Mikey never told a soul until our 10-year reunion when he confided in me that he did it. I still can almost taste that horrific smell. Story 3.
What was the saddest thing you saw a parent do as a child? I was 4 years old, and my nighttime routine was always telling my mom and dad how much I loved them. One night, I couldn't find my mom to tell her goodnight, so I searched everywhere in the house, backyard, etc. Finally, 4-year-old me went out the front door, looked around, and saw a person standing in the middle of a crowded street with cars zooming by and swerving around them. I started walking down the sidewalk to get a better look because I thought it was the weirdest thing. Turns out it was my mom, but what was weird is she wasn't answering to my calls. I started getting really scared because my mom had recently turned blind, and here she was. I ran back to the house and got my dad to go help her because I was too afraid to go in the street to get her. It wasn't until many years later that I realized I had witnessed my mom attempting to end her life via getting hit by a car. She was severely depressed due to having gone blind at the age of 34 with us 2 small kids. It makes me sad to think about, but she's gotten better now despite still being blind.
Story 4. What's the best lie that you were told as a child? When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I was out in my backyard digging for treasure as kids do when I found an old penny. I excitedly took my treasure inside to clean it in the sink when, to my horror, I dropped my treasure down the drain. I ran to my mom and tearfully explained to her that my penny fell all the way to China. Now you'd think the story would end there, but that's just the beginning. About a week later, I got a letter in the mail. I'm 6, so this is a big deal. This has never happened before. I opened the letter in front of my mom and brothers and started reading the contents out loud. It was a very official-sounding declaration from the president of the Chinese government that they had found my penny and that after analyzing the fingerprints, they had determined the penny belonged to me. There was also a copy of the letter in actual handwritten Chinese, and of course my penny taped to the letter. I took that penny and letter to show and tell, and I held on to it for years. As I got older, I figured out Santa and the Easter Bunny weren't real on my own, but man, was I disappointed when I was told that my China penny wasn't real.
Story 5.
What moment made you realize you had to turn your life around? I hallucinated that I had spent the entire night running from the cops and the army in the woods, and no matter how hard I tried, the police chopper stayed above me. Eventually, I figured that the chopper had some infrared camera that could see my body heat in the dark forest, so I found a body of water and got neck deep in it and stayed in the water for hours. I still heard sirens, but I stayed awake the entire night until it got bright out. When the sun came up, it got blazing hot, and I discovered I was in the nastiest cesspool with things like eels and frogs swimming and slithering around me. Obviously, the cops were never chasing me, but instead I was tweaking on meth and imagining that they were. I literally found myself covered in shit and severely dehydrated miles and miles from civilization on the hottest day of the year in Nevada. It took me an entire day to find my way out of the forest, and I was eventually found by a very concerned-looking park ranger. The shame and terror that moment instilled in me is no doubt what made me who I am today, and I've been clean ever since.
Story 6.
What's the craziest thing a babysitter ever said to you? When I was 8, I had a new teenage babysitter, and right after my parents left, she asked me in a pleasant tone, "All right, Jenna, where's the water that your daddy drinks before he hits your mommy?" I come from a stable household with 2 parents that had a good marriage. I was confused, so I said, "I don't know. My dad doesn't hit my mom." And she got kind of silent. She asked if I was being serious and that she would tell on me if I was lying, and I told her I was being honest. Then she said, "I thought that everybody knew where their stash is." I remember seeing her crying after that, and she was awkwardly quiet until my parents got home. After this, she also never came to babysit me again. I thought of this recently because she was arrested for possession of crystal meth for her 3rd time, and she got a 20-year-long sentence due to her history. When I finally had the realization of what was going on in her life, I felt so bad that I took my stable childhood and having 2 loving parents in my life for granted.
Story 7.
What's the craziest thing someone ever confessed to you? I once went to a parents-only barbecue for my son's 3rd grade class. I knew the hosting couple, Tim and Anna, casually from the school, but we had more been acquaintances as opposed to friends. As the night went on, more folks got drunk and rowdy. I'm not much of a drinker, so I'm sitting on the patio watching the fun when Tim sits next to me, fairly drunk, and started to say what a pity it was that I was single. I braced myself for a drunken proposal, but boy, was I wrong as to where this conversation was going. He said he wishes he had a friend like me, so I start looking for an excuse to leave when out of nowhere he said he had a confession to make. He said that when he was 19, he had murdered his stepfather after he had hit his mom 1 too many times. He even went into specifics of what he did with the body, and that for the last 16 years, everyone thought that the stepfather had run away. No one even suspected that he had murdered him. I just sat there. What the hell do you say to that? Apparently, nobody besides me, including his family, has any idea of the truth, and everyone to this day thinks he just ran away.
Story 8.
When did somebody at your work just completely lose it? This guy worked in my beef jerky plant, and most of the people on the packing line were women. I hired this guy, and he didn't seem crazy like some others, and things were good for a week. In his 2nd week, though, he didn't like that he couldn't sit until break, so he started telling the ladies on the line that he knows how to kill and skin a human, and nobody would catch him in this small town. 5 women all rushed my office at break, and I had to call the police before I even called him to the factory manager's office. As soon as the guy walked in, he said, "I knew those bitches would say something. The factory is majority woman-run." I looked at the plant manager. She nodded, and I told him that we had to let him go due to the disturbing things he said and that he couldn't come back. The officer followed him out to his car, and that was the last we saw of the guy. He called 2 weeks later, asking if he could pick up some kitchen knives he had left in his locker before he was fired. I told him I'd leave them at the police station, but he never came to get them. To this day, we have no idea what the hell was up with that guy.